Thank you for tuning in to Grieving Voices again. If this is your second, third, fourth, fifth time, welcome. And if this is your first time, thank you for being here. Today, my guest is Amy Medcalf. She is one of two members in her podcast, Once Upon a Nightmare, who deals with her loss and grief through humor and spooky things. She is new to the podcasting world and working her way through to find peace of mind as daily life can be hard. Keeping busy helps, and especially when it's something that you're interested in, like your podcast.
Exactly.
So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with your podcast, Once Upon a Nightmare. And what was the prompting for you to create that?
So I've always kind of wanted to do a podcast. It's been on my mind for the past few years, but it's what do I want to do? I wasn't sure if I wanted to do things that were part of my job, but even then it's you gotta kind of back away from that, because if you get too much into your job when you're a social worker and you're working with vulnerable people, you tend to kind of burn out really fast, and I didn't want to kind of get into something like that. And I really like spooky things. I'm an October baby. So I hold October and spooky near and dear to my heart, and my friend, she is very into spooky stuff as well. So I like true crime, I like all that kind of stuff, and it kind of makes me happy, and it allows me to kind of express myself in a different way than what a lot of people who know me see on a daily kind of. So
I connect with what you're saying. I actually just shared my most recent newsletter was about being in a way addicted to sadness. And
yeah, it's very much true. I find if I am alone and in my head a little too much, I can make myself, I can hurt my own feelings and make myself cry. It's I feel like if you've just always felt like you've always had things happen to you, especially with loss, and whether that's with a death or a breaking of a relationship, like a friendship or whatever, you tend to kind of get in your head and all this stuff, and it's why do people keep leaving me? Why am I always alone? And why does everything always happen to me? And it's kind of like a security blanket kind of, and and a lot of people use that to not get close to people, right? So that's definitely a thing where you can be addicted to sadness. So
well, because I've just been really investigating this for myself because I love true crime. Always have.
Yeah.
I was reading Patricia Cornwell, when I was a teenager, and loved true crime then. And some of my favorite podcasts are true crime podcasts. And so what do you think, and you're a social worker, correct?
Yeah.
So what do you think well, I have so many questions now. So what led you, do you think that, because I think for me, a little bit of it is that I feel a connection to the sadness that victims feel.
Oh
the
yeah.
survivors, or, connecting to that on the base of loss, right?
Yeah.
And it's very traumatic for families when
Oh
they go
yeah.
through stuff like that. But do you think this connection to other people and their sadness is kind of what led you, and your own personal experience, of course, led you to be a social worker?
Kind of. I think at the time I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was on my own at 16. So I didn't finish high school. I ended up getting my GED, and I had a really great sense of empathy, and I liked helping people and all that other stuff. And especially when it came to understanding them on that deeper level, when they're going through loss or they're going through being on their own for the first time and they're very young and because they got kicked out or they had a really bad family dynamic and all that stuff. And I think that was part of the reason, like part of it. And I didn't kind of want to leave the town that I was in, and the college in the town, it was very, very small. It was held in our arena, and there was only like a handful of classes, and they just came in with like a social work program, and somebody mentioned it to me, so I applied and I got in, and yeah.
That's amazing. So how many years have you been doing this work?
So I graduated in 2013, and before I graduated, I started working at kind of like a group home setting for adults with autism and anything else, because with autism comes a plethora of other
Lots of
fun
grief.
things.
Mhm.
Like, so yeah, it's just a lot of the times I worked with like them, and then I worked in group homes for teen girls, which a lot of them I still talk to now that they're older and everything, and they're and they still come to me for advice sometimes. They're like, Amy, like I need help. And so it's just like I really liked working with youth the most, I think, because that's where I felt my loss the most. So right now I live in Montreal. I'm not bilingual, so I'm nannying. But I also did daycare and all that stuff. So it's just I didn't mind the group home. Like the group home was very like kept you on the go all the time. So
Do you miss that work?
sometimes, but
Yeah.
they tend to like you tend to get really overworked and like burnt out so fast, and because there's so much turnover, because people don't realize like how hard it is. Like it's heartbreaking. Like I remember when one of the group homes I was working for was getting shut down, and like the kids were crying, they were upset, they didn't want to like leave. Like probably wasn't the greatest one, but like it was better than most. So I can like, yeah, it
Good
was
for the
heartbreaking.
kids. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, because that's their family, right? For a lot of them.
exactly. Like as much as they fight with all the other girls, they love each other in a sisterly kind of way. And I know a lot of them are still like talking with each other and like being there for each other in a certain way. And even though they still talk badly about each other sometimes, and it's like, oh my God, girls, like you guys haven't changed. But no, they do become a family, even with like um the staff, like the ones that stay. And it's hard when staff leave and come and go, and because they always come and go, and if they're there for a long time, and it's like they feel like they don't really have a home, but like they try to make the best of it.
Well, right, because they come from instability. And so when there's no instability
Mhm.
on where they're stuck,
Yeah.
essentially, because they're children and they don't
Mhm.
have really much of a choice unless they try and go out on the streets.
Yeah.
So was that you? Were you a child in a group home then at 16 or a youth group program?
Um, when I was out on my own, I ended up in the shelter, like a youth shelter, on and off. And but I never really like lived fully on the streets. I couldn't live without a shower. So I always opted for the shelter if I could. And I had some places on my own, but like it's hard when you're 16 and you're on your own and you don't have those life skills. Like I'm still paying for some of my lack of life skills. Like I had a credit card at 18 and I didn't like use it properly, and it affected my credit. Although I'm like working on that even at 33. Like if I could go back, younger me would do things a lot differently, I would hope. But I was more in group home, not group homes, shelters than group homes. So CAS didn't come in when I was on my own.
And you speak to the importance of support and having that support system and
Mhm.
just learning life skills because like look at the impact that you're living now. And I had a little bit of that too. Like you just if you're not taught, you just don't
No,
know.
that's exactly it. Like when my mom passed away, I was 11 years old, and I went to go live with my godparents, and my godmother did a lot of my stuff. So like, yeah, I would clean my room and all that other stuff. But like a lot of the time she would clean my room. She would do my laundry. Like I knew how to do laundry because my mom made me do laundry sometimes when I was younger to teach me. Like my mom tried. And but like I had such really bad depression that cleaning wasn't a priority in my life. And like when you are super depressed, those things tend to go unnoticed. And like you don't like usually invite people in, like you don't like hanging out with anybody because you're like, my place is a mess. Or if you do invite somebody, like I remember I would invite like somebody would be like, oh, let's hang out. I'm like, okay. And I would be up all night cleaning my little apartment because it was so hard to get up and do things. And I also dealt with anxiety as well, which I still kind of deal with. And I probably had anxiety prior to, and with the death of my mom, like I have anxiety when it comes to death and dying because it was so young. And then there was other people that died in my life at the time. So um it definitely is very very hard to deal with. And I've learned that sometimes you don't have to be blood related to be family. I've chosen a lot of friends who have become my family, and they are probably the best things in my life. So not that I didn't talk to my, like I always try to keep a contact with my godmother, and until she died 4 years ago. So a lot of people that I consider family are definitely not blood related for sure. um but yeah.
May I ask what happened with the relationship with the godmother that you were with her from 11 and then what happened when you left at 16?
So I didn't like leave. um my like her daughter was living with us, and she's 17 years older than me. And her and my godmother went to the cottage for the weekend, and I didn't want to go. And I snuck on the computer when I was grounded from the computer. So when they got back, they found out I was on the computer. I got grounded again. And my I call her my god sister. She came into my room. She was a big girl too, and like I'm a big girl. And I was looking for my belt. I was supposed to be cleaning my room, and she's like, um, what are you doing? And I'm like, looking for my belt. And she's like, it probably wouldn't fit you anyway. And I'm like, basically saying that I'm too big for it or whatever. And I was like, so I found it, I put it on. I'm like, look at that. It's on the last hole. Like, not the first one, like the last one. And it was like, and she just kept teasing me. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to deal with you. It was more, I didn't want to deal with my god sister. So I went out, and I was, because like I tend to, I'm like a very I don't like conflict.
Mhm.
So I try to like leave it as much as possible. And I went out to go see my friend. And as I was leaving, my godmother said that if I left, then don't come back. But she was saying it hoping that I just wouldn't leave.
Mm.
And I went out, and my friend took me around, and I went and found somebody I could stay with for the night until things cooled down. And I saw my godmother driving by when I was in the other town, because we lived in in a very small town, and the two towns were very connected. And when I went back to get my clothes, she wasn't there, but my god sister and my godfather were. And my god sister had this dog. It was a Jack Russell, and he was so vicious. Anyway, she had him in his arm, and she's like, "Give me your key." And I'm like, "No, like I'm not giving you my key. I'm just getting clothes for the night." And she follows me up to my room, and she's telling me to give her my key, and I'm like, "No, like no, no, no." And she grabs me by the back of my neck, pins me to my bed, and is trying to get the key. And I'm screaming. My godfather comes in, tells her to get off of me, but then tells me to give her my key. And for years, I thought that it was all of their doing, but like I realized that my godmother did not know any of this. And to the day that she died believing that I left on my own. Cause like I wouldn't talk about it much, because like every time we would talk about it, she'd get upset. Like I would try to like say like, no, this is what happened, and she'd get upset. And like I didn't really want to upset her. She was like like she was born in 44, so she was older, and it was like she was having a lot of health problems, and I didn't want to like, so I never got that closure with her, and it was like really really heartbreaking. But I'm working on getting that closure for myself, kind of, and getting it out there, because I don't want to like I told my god brother the story, and I told their cousin, so she's kind of like my cousin too. And I'm like, just so you know, I'm not this bad person, like, because I thought they were all kicking me out, there was a little bit of animosity when I was trying to like get some more of my stuff so that I had clothes and everything to wear. And it was a big thing. So it was really hard.
I imagine.
Yeah.
And you speak to what I talk a lot about, and what we share in grief recovery is this incomplete emotionally being, this feeling of being emotionally incomplete with people.
Yeah.
And that's almost tormenting to us.
Yeah, it's almost worse. Like it's not like she's still alive and I can like be like, hey, let's talk about it. Now that I'm older and I kind of understand how to talk about it with somebody, especially because I went to school for it. But like, and because of like working in my field, like you tend to kind of like build these things as you get older, whether you're in the field or not. You tend to build like a little more clarity of like how you should deal with things. Like I don't know if you do this or any, like I know a lot of people do this, but like I sit there and I'll like have conversations in my head, and I'm like, okay, this is how this conversation is going to go. It never goes the way I want it to, but I'm like, or I'll go back and I'll like think of a great comeback, and then I'm like, oh, I wish I knew that before I like ended that conversation. But but yeah, like I wish I could sit her down and talk to her, like and be like, hey, I didn't leave. Like, I didn't want to leave. I was young, I was scared. Like I've never like felt more alone at that time, you know, and it's a scary thing when you're 16.
Now, since you're into spooky things, do you believe in the afterlife?
Oh, totally. So I believe now, like, if she could, she would tell me that she now knows. Cause like I'm sure in the afterlife she would know, especially like if you do connect with people in your past. So like she would have had that connection with my mom or whoever else, right? And it's like the communication and finding out what really goes on. And I had a friend who, well, I have, she's still my friend. Her and her mom do tarot, and like I think she kind of like she also has like a connection with people in the other side. And it's like, and she said that she used to feel sick every time she looked at my room because of what happened and everything, and she's like she didn't realize that that's what went down and blah blah blah. And I believe it on a note, but like my friend also kind of knew, so like it's kind of like Is that her picking up that, or is that her picking up what she also knows at the same time, right? Although
Mhm.
she forgets the most of it. So um but it's definitely a huge belief of mine. I do believe in psychics, the right kind of psychics. And because there are some people who will say that they're psychic and they're just not, because it's good scam money, I guess. But yeah, so I definitely believe in the afterlife and ghosts.
You might be interested in listening to my episode with Siri Burnson. She is a
Okay.
certified psychic medium.
Oh, really? Eh?
Yeah, but she's also a grief recovery specialist like me. So
Oh, cool.
yeah,
I
she's
will definitely
amazing.
take a look at
Yeah,
that.
it's a good listen because she also helps people to understand how to connect to their loved
Yeah.
ones too in that episode.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I would recommend that. Um, so with your mom, I know you
Mhm.
mentioned this emotionally incomplete feeling with your godmother, but how about your mom? Like, was that a good relationship?
Oh yeah, my mom was a single parent. I was an only child. My mom was in now every child says this about their mom, but my mom was the greatest. She, from what I can remember, she was she was tough, but she was good. Like, she was a very good person. She was very helpful to a lot of people. Like, I remember she would help her friends by taking in their kids who were a little rough on the edges, and she would help them kind of like um be like, hey, like, you can't be like this. Or she would take in, like, I know my cousin came to stay with us because he didn't have anywhere else to go at a point, and all this other stuff. So it's like my mom was very helpful to a lot of people, and I feel like she also kind of like put others before herself. um but we had a really good relationship. I loved her. She was like my best friend, as much of a kid as, like, as much as I can say as a kid. Like, I wish I kind of have known been able to know her as an adult and be an actual friend with her and know more about her life than what a child knows about their mom at the time, you know? So it's like, I know, like, I feel like I got robbed of that, and it's always been my biggest thing, is like, I wish I had known her more as an adult. So
Do you have other family of hers that you've been able to I mean, I know you mentioned you don't have much family, but did she
yeah.
have siblings and things that you could learn about her from?
My family life is so she has friends that I can kind of like hit up and be like, hey, like, but a lot of them are just like, she just loved you so much. Like, that's usually all like I get. Like, she just adored you. She just, like, you were her life, you were her universe, basically. And it's like, that's basically, and I try not to delve into it because they also go through the loss, and I kind of haven't like wanted to kind of know too much yet, and I don't know the right questions to ask, like what I want to know. Like, but like, my mom was adopted, and my nana and papa also adopted another kid, and so that was my uncle Chris. And after my nana died, my uncle Chris went missing. He went MIA, but he always went MIA even when my mom and my nana were alive. And my mom was the one who kind of like went knocking on his door, because he was an alcoholic and he had his problems. And um, so she would go knocking on his door, and she'd be like, no, you need to get back in there, and you need to get your help and all this other stuff. And um, my nana died not long after my mom. So, and then my papa died a few years back, but I stopped talking to him when I was like 18, I think, maybe before that, way before that. And my uncle Chris's son, my cousin Peter, him and I stopped talking. So, and it's not that I wanted to stop talking to them. It's just things happen. So like when I was on my own, my cousin Peter was like, hey, let's go to Papa's for Thanksgiving. And that's usually like my birthday weekend. And I had just gotten this job at a restaurant and I'm like, oh, hey, like I would love to, but I have to work. And he got mad at me saying like I put work before my family. And then he stopped talking to me, never talked to me ever since.
Mm.
And we lived in the same town and I would see him all the time. And yeah, so that one was, but he has his own issues and I do kind of I am kind of thankful that I don't share blood with some of these because like even my papa, like I didn't find out he had a brother until my nana's funeral and I was 12 at the time because like she died around my 12th. She died the day before or the day after my 12th birthday. And so a lot of his life was very secretive and then he was also kind of abusive to me in his own way. Like he came over for Christmas to my godparents. I was 15 years old and he looks at me and he's like, you could find a nice boy if you lost some weight. And it's like, who says that to a 15-year-old child? And he started dating this other woman um, who apparently he ended up marrying. I didn't know that until I saw his obituary because I was trying to like find my mom's obituary and I stumbled upon it. So he got together with this woman and my godmother made me go visit him and her. And I didn't want to because like one, I didn't really know her. They also weren't living in the home that I grew up in anymore. And so it was just awkward for me. And when I went there, I went to help with the dishes because I was a polite kid and I did do a lot of stuff. And so I went to help with the dishes and she's like, oh, no, 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 no. You just sit there, you relax and all this other stuff. And she would do that. And like they lived in like Etobicoke, so like Toronto and Ontario. So not the safest place. So I wouldn't even leave. I didn't go anywhere. And like I'd be home alone most of the time. And yeah, so like then when they sent me home, she gives my godparents a letter, which I read. So, and they're basically saying that I'm lazy, I don't do anything, I need to do more chores and all this stuff. I'm like, who are you? Like, even my godmother was like, this is ridiculous. I did my chores. Like, she knows that. Sorry. And so like after that, I just kind of like was iffy about him. And then I was even more iffy because I was homeless and they wouldn't help me. They let me stay in a shelter at 16, even though they had a 2-bedroom, just because, and I kind of get it, but I also kind of don't. But because her granddaughter, who was like severely autistic, would come and stay, and she can get, and like when you're autistic, sometimes you get a little, well, some people on the spectrum, they tend to be a little bit like violent depending on their communication level. And she was nonverbal. So when she couldn't communicate, she tended to lash out, right? And it's like, I get it. But if that's only like every now and then, why can't I come and have a home? So it was very hard on me that he did that and didn't stand up for me and be like, hey, let me help you. So
So you kind of felt like you were on an island, right?
yeah,
As my
people who
my
were,
illustration of for my podcast illustrates, is you feel like you're on an island often as a
yeah,
griever.
yeah, it's exactly it. And like sometimes you sit there and you're like, these people who are supposed to love me and care for me are doing nothing and they're letting me drown. Like this island is like starting to flood at this point. It's becoming Atlantis and I'm like going down with it. And it's only me that has brought myself out of it. I've had to rely on myself a lot, and I've had to rely heavily on a lot of my friends who were very supportive and very helpful, and a lot of them who are still helpful in my life. And I I don't know where I would be if I didn't have that determination to stay afloat. Um, which sometimes I sunk, but like eventually I did get back up. And that is how life is like there are going to be times where you feel like you're sinking, but you can't let yourself drown. Like, you have to figure out your ways. Like, everybody has their own ways of dealing with their anxiety, their depression, their grief, and it's all about finding your niche. And sometimes you need to find more than one because like you can't consistently rely on the one. But um sorry, tickle in my throat. um but you like for me, if I'm being like feeling anxious, I can call a friend, or I try to. If they're like, I have like a few friends like on standby, so if one doesn't answer, I can call this person, and it's like that's helped me a lot. And also music is another thing for me when I'm feeling anxious. This is more like when I'm out, because like with my anxiety, I developed agoraphobia, so for the longest time I couldn't go places without feeling like I'm gonna die. And because
Mm.
my mom died of a massive heart attack, I and the anxiety symptoms that you tend to get, so like the heart palpitations, the beating of the heart, like not being able to breathe, I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. So that was a lot of my life where sometimes I couldn't even get off the couch. And it it's not easy. It's so not easy, but I got to a point now where, yeah, sometimes I have really hard days where it's hard for me to go from point A to point B, but I can now drive to my work, which is a 40-minute drive, and on the highway, which I never liked driving on because I had very bad anxiety back in the day. But I go from point A to point B, and like I don't break down, and it's because I've learned to develop like what I need to get there and do that. Like sometimes I'll be in my head, I'm like, okay, there's so many people around, if something happens, like they'll help you. Like or at least one out of the 20 people that are around here will help. And it's like being in my head and doing that. Whereas like whenever I would go and talk to somebody, their advice when you have an anxiety attack, a lot of the times, I don't know if it's changed, but because like every time I now go in, I'm like the counting 5 things I can taste, touch, hear, and everything, that doesn't work. Like I just need to talk it out. I know what I can do when I'm feeling anxious at the time, but I think when I get to the level of holding things in, which I do a lot still, um, I need somebody non-biased to talk to. That's all I need, is somebody non-biased that I can talk to and let it all out.
Mhm.
Because my boyfriend, I'm sure he's sick of hearing things. Like he's like, okay, I get it. And like, but he's biased and he will always be on my side in every single case. And so will my friends. And like, or they'll be like, or they just don't understand. And even when you talk to a professional, they might not understand in your case, but they understand how to talk to you when it comes to those moments, and that I found was a really great thing. And I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, you need to talk to like, I can talk to you as much as possible and I can give you the greatest advice ever. And I get it, I'm a social worker, but I'm also biased. Like, you're my friend.
Mhm.
You have to talk to somebody who
That's
doesn't know you.
that's great advice.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point, and I just want to say this too, because you didn't lead with, when you contacted me to be on the podcast, you didn't lead with the fact that you are a social worker.
No.
And I find that interesting. And not because you're not doing that work right now, but I
Mhm.
just find that interesting. And I say that because you're coming on here to share your story, right?
Mm.
but not from a place of expertise. You're an expert in your story, of course. We all
Yeah.
are an expert in our
Mhm.
story. No one knows it like we do. But I bring that up because even though you've had this training and this education, you are still a griever. You
Mhm.
are still processing your own stuff. And
Mhm.
as a social worker, you too need somebody. You can't heal alone on an island.
No, no.
So I just wanted to bring that up. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, no worries. And that's exactly it. Like, and I tell people this all the time. And I feel like people use my not well, they don't use it, but like they're like, oh my God, like Amy like would be a better person to give advice. And I'm like, okay, I don't mind giving you advice, but I'm not gonna sit down with you once a week and like because that's not part of like what I do anyways, as a person and a professional or whatever. And it's like, um, and even then, like what I've been through and even what I've learned in my training and everything is not black and white. It's not what's written down in the books. You have to read outside of those lines all the time because everybody deals with grief or any situation that's traumatic in so many different ways. And because everybody's brain, I think of the brain like a fingerprint. They are so unique. They are so powerful. And like, I could be sitting there and all of a sudden I'm remembering something I did when I was like 6 years old or something. And I get embarrassed and I'm like, oh my God, like why are we thinking about my past like this? Like I just wanted to watch my Netflix show, you know? But yeah, like everybody's brain is so different and everybody deals with grief differently. Like even if it was the exact same situation, like say you and I shared the situation, your mom died the same year, you were the same age as me in the same way, and all this other stuff, like it could be the exact situation, but because you and I are totally two different people with two different brains, you're going to grieve a lot differently than what I'm going to grieve.
Well, and not only that, our relationships with our mothers are very different.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
that brain to brain connection with that person, that relationship with that person.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. And like when I was young, after my mom died, I denied going to see a psychologist, which I really regret. As I got older, I did go through bereavement counseling through school, like every single year through school. But as I got older, I remember talking to a social worker or somebody, and they asked me like what I used to do when I was younger and I was grieving. Now, there I had some positive, but I also had some negative because of my anxiety. I would also stay up and late as I could because I was afraid I was going to die in my sleep and I wouldn't like and I stayed up until I passed out. So, I didn't get a lot of sleep when I was younger. But when I was really upset, like I had a bad day or I had a fight with my godparents, I would um write in a journal to her and I like ask her questions. I'd be like, how's heaven? Like, I hope you're okay, and all this other stuff, and tell her, like, I wish you were still here, and all this stuff. And then as I got older, when I was allowed to just sit outside at night, like at midnight, and cry, I would look up at the stars and I would talk to her and all this other stuff. So it's when I spoke to the social worker and I told them that, they're like, basically, you found your own ways of coping in a healthy way. And that's how I coped with it when I was younger. And it did help me a lot. And because, like, but when I was younger, I was very creative. I like to write, I like to draw. I still like to, I just never have the time to. But, so those were my outlets, and that's how I coped with it. And as I got older, I loved looking at the stars. And I remember when I was younger as well, after she died, somebody showed me the stars and they're like, the first star you see is always your mom shining down on you. And I always will look up, and the first star I see is the one that I always talk to. And it doesn't always have to be the brightest star, but it's very helpful in a way. But again, what was helpful for me might not be helpful for the next person. It's always just finding your niche.
Well, and it changes over time too, right?
Yeah, I
I
don't
mean,
do
it's
that as much anymore.
well, and especially considering our frontal lobes aren't fully developed until we're 25 too, right? 26,
Yeah, that's true.
25, something like that, you know?
Yeah.
So we don't have the cognitive ability in a lot of ways to emotionally process some things until we are actually getting that's why the midlife crisis is what it
Mhm.
is, I think, because it takes so long for our brain to fully develop,
Yeah.
that our and everything that but here's the fascinating thing too about it is that everything that you learn and how to cope with challenges in life are developed by the age of 3 or 4. Like
Yeah.
75% of how you will cope with challenges as an adult are formed and developed in your beliefs, like what you know by the
Mhm.
age of 3 or 4. 75%. And
And it's so
the rest is like 15, 16.
oof. And it's so crazy because like we don't realize, a lot of people don't realize that, and it's how you nurture and deal with situations when you're talking to your children who are at that age and older and all that stuff, and it how you treat the situations at that time is how they're going to figure out how to treat it in the future, and it could not be in the right way. And not that parenting is easy and is not perfect, and sometimes we're going to do things the wrong way. I'm not a parent, but like I'm talking about other people who are parents, and I have friends who struggle and they're like, I think I'm failing, and I'm like, you're not failing. There's no book written about being a perfect parent, and there's no perfect parent. You're fine. Are your kids eating? Do you have a shelter over their head? Do they have a bed to sleep in at night? You're doing great. Like and that's exactly it. And I tell my friends all the time, like my one friend, she needs a break, and I'm like, take that break. Tell your partner, next time you're off, I'm going. And she's like, I don't even know myself anymore. I'm like, you don't have to know yourself. And I'm like, go get a coffee and go sit by a, the water or somewhere, or go into the woods and scream. Like, you don't have to go to the spa or go to the movies. Like, it's not about that. It's about channeling who you are and like getting deeper into yourself and having that quiet and alone time sometimes because you have children or whatever at you all the time. And it's totally not what we're talking about when it comes to grief, but like it is a kind of grief though, because mothers who are there for their kids all the time feel like they lost themselves.
Mhm.
And that's another part of grief. And when and especially with postpartum and that being a big thing, you got to understand that you have to take that break. You have to go, and it's okay to cry. And I tell this to everybody, no matter what it is, if it hurts you enough, it's okay to cry. Crying like releases that chemical in your brain that helps you feel good. I find if I have a nice good cry, I'm good, I'm tired, and I'm ready to go to bed. Like
Mhm.
I take that time to cry sometimes, and if I really don't want to, I try not to look at animal videos. But um you got to understand that to help yourself, it's not always about having to go out and do something where you're spending a whole ton of money. Like, just go to the coffee shop, get a $2 coffee, and just go sit in your car, cry, scream, or just watch and meditate. Like, you don't have to do anything super extreme to kind of like get that chemical release in your brain that says, okay, you're okay.
To everything you just said, that was like my life. That was me in motherhood. It was my youngest went to kindergarten. I had this midlife crisis. Like that was my
Yeah.
identity. I did have a business at the time too, which I also closed at around the same time, or
Oh
I
wow.
knew I was going to close it. And so I lost that baby and I
Oh.
lost my other baby. And it was a really difficult time. And that's really what opened me up to wanting to feel better, to wanting to discover myself, who I was before them, who I
Mhm.
was before grief, even, because that really opened up a lot of old wounds too, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, children will do that. And that's, I mean, that's what happens is they reflect back to us what we need to really work on in ourselves. And I say this to
Mhm.
on this podcast a lot. If you're a parent and you're listening, the best thing you can ever do for your kids is to work on yourself,
Yeah,
bar none.
that's
That's
exactly
the
it.
greatest gift you can give
Yeah.
them.
Like, I find a lot of mothers tend to put their all into the household and making sure when you like 24/7 and you like it's even like with my job when I was working at group homes, I'd be at that group home and I'd just go home and I'd sleep and I'd come back. And I never took time to care for myself. And when you don't take that time, you tend to burn out. And burnout can look like depression, it can look like anxiety, it can look like um, a, a multitude of other things. Like you just don't want to do anything, you don't want to shower, you don't want to eat, you don't like, or you forget to eat. Like and you got to understand that you can't do it all by yourself. You have, if you have a partner or if you have somebody like a friend to come be like, hey, can you come watch my kids for an hour? I need to go and I need some time to myself. Or tell your partner like, hey, I want to take the day, you get your time, I want my time. Like you got to be demanding. Like you're not failing as a parent because you need a break from your kids.
That's the greatest example you can give your kids is
Exactly.
caring for yourself.
Exactly. And that's
Grab
exactly
a
it.
grab a pen
And
and paper and go somewhere. And that's how you discover yourself. Ask yourself some deeper, better questions
exactly. And it also teaches them that you have boundaries yourself. Cause
and
like,
value yourself.
exactly. Cause like as a mom, I'm sure like you'd go to the bathroom and hello, there's a child there watching you, like, or asking you, hey, can I have a snack while dad's out in the living room or near the kitchen? And it's like, go ask him, I'm peeing. Like,
You're
you
right.
know?
Yep.
So like, I also read this thing that was really, really great. It was this couple and each of them had one day in the week where at a certain time they got to go do whatever they needed to and they would take care of the kids. So say, and there was this one example that they put where the mom, it was her time to have her day and she went into her room their room and to have her time, and he gave her that. And one of the children kept saying, I want to ask mommy something, and he's like, no, you can wait, if you need something you can ask me. And like she got upset and everything, and but the whole time he kept his foot down. He's like, if you need something you can ask me, until then you can wait until the morning. So I think it as it usually is, it's usually minuscule, like I need a snack.
Mm-hmm.
But and the next morning he's like, she, because I think he explained it to her, and he's like, sometimes mommy needs a break and right now she's taking her break and you need to deal with me. So the next morning she even asked like her mom, like, how was your time? Like, I think she kind of got it, but like you have to be very consistent with children when it comes to stuff like that, because like you need to teach them like, hey, like it's something that you don't like, so like if I were to do this to you, how would you feel? And like they are at the level where they can understand that. And it's like I remember, and I take that back to like when I was a kid. I was out with my mom, we were at like a restaurant, and I bit my mom for some reason. I wasn't being malicious. I was just like, oh, I wonder what happens if I do this. And my mom bit me back and I didn't like it. And trust me, I never bit after that. Like parents nowadays, like I get it. Like they'd be like, oh my God, like why would she bite you? I'm like, well, it taught me that I didn't like it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that I probably shouldn't do it ever again. And now I kind of like do it jokingly, like with my boyfriend. I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna bite you. Like, but like I don't like bite hard and like I did when I was a kid. And it's like you kind of take things like that and you have to kind of give them natural consequences to like what they do. And I think a lot of people protect their kids from that. Um, but
Well,
in
and
life we have them.
just to that point, it's let them sit in their uncomfortable feelings for a little bit.
That's exactly it, right? And
They don't learn how to manage their emotions if their
giving
emotions are
given that
constant.
band-aid,
Right.
yeah, that's exactly it. You need to give them that band-aid. You can't keep giving them that band-aid. Sometimes they need to realize like, hey, I need to give myself that band-aid because I'm old enough to do so.
Well,
And
and when they see that they went through this uncomfortable feeling, I couldn't talk
mhm,
to my mom. It was uncomfortable. I didn't like it. And the
yeah,
next day, well, it was okay. I was
yeah,
fine. It wasn't that big of a deal. They
no,
start
exactly.
connecting those dots and they make that connection themselves.
Mhm. And they and when they get older, they're gonna be like, man,
You
my
got some
parents aren't
tough
leaving me alone
boundaries.
now. Mom, I need my space. Like, so like, but it's always about give and take. And you need to you need to put those boundaries and teach your kids these boundaries, right? So I don't even know how we got on this topic.
I'm not sure either, but it's a good one. And because
Yeah,
that's a lot of grief. I mean,
it is.
it's parenting is going to have a lot of grief. It's going to carry a lot
Mhm.
of grief with it because you will feel like you're failing a lot and
Mhm.
you do what you know best. But if you can work through your own stuff so that whenever your children are doing something and projecting their feelings and it's reminding you of something from your childhood, and then all of a sudden it's really emotionally fueled and all of the it's you can't I know me personally, I had a lot of pent up anger from
Mhm.
my childhood. My dad passed away when I was 8. Just
Mhm.
a lot of anger, just a lot of anger from my
Yeah.
childhood. And
Yeah.
I stuffed it down. And like you talked about like the things that you used to cope. And for me, it was writing.
Mhm.
I had a journal and then until my mom read it. And, but yeah, it's parenting is an ever changing. You constantly, every day is an opportunity to learn something,
Oh
but you
yeah.
have to be an observer. You have to be
Mhm.
you kind of step back from the situation and just observe, like, why
Yeah.
is this like stirring me up? Like, why is this making me upset?
Yeah.
And usually it's not the child that's intentionally doing it. It's that feeling you get that you feel provoked, right?
Mhm.
You just
Yeah.
feel provoked. So
Yeah.
that's what you got to work through. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. And children, they know how to push buttons.
Well, and you're a
But
nanny. I mean,
yeah,
right? You're not a parent, but
I
you're a nanny. I used to watch that show Super Nanny because that's
me
when I was
too.
when I was
Oh
feeling
no.
kind of crazy as a parent. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, it's
And
easier for her.
yeah, and it's crazy like you see like these families where these kids are like running the show and it's like, okay, but you're the parent and it's like parent first and friend later. And it's like and
1 second. Hold on.
yeah.
See, the school calls about something and it rings every phone in the house.
Oh no.
Talking about kids. And I usually don't have a phone in here, but yeah, it actually interrupted on my computer. It interrupted my phone. And yeah. Okay. Sorry. Scratch that. Start over. I'm going to have to edit.
No worries. Okay. So you got to parent first and friend later, because if you're teaching your kids, like, yes, you want to be their friend. Yes, you want to have that relationship. And it's hard to kind of like build from how you were brought up, but there's different ways of parenting from the way you were brought up, because a lot of people are very hey, like, I didn't like how my mom raised me, like I didn't like being grounded, I didn't like this or whatever, and like I get it. And but kids need structure, kids need that, hey, like if I do something that's not appropriate, I'm going to get in trouble for it. Like in real world, if somebody does something bad, they're either going to get fined, they're going to go to jail, they're going to get fired, all that other stuff. And if we're saying like, hey, it's okay, like you did this, like I understand your feelings, and I do understand your feelings, like you can still talk to them as the adult, but you need to put those pieces down where it's like, hey, you know what, like this is a natural consequence and you're going to have to sit in your room. I get it, these are your big feelings, this is how you deal with it, but natural consequences is you need to sit in your room and you don't get electronics, because in real world you can't be like going out there and saying like and screaming and yelling or whatever the case is. And I can't think of a situation right now, but like
I think like what you're saying, it comes
yeah,
down to accountability.
it does, it definitely comes down to accountability and keeping that structure and keeping in line with what you say. And kids are going to be all on you and like begging, and it's like you have to keep your foot down, you have to, because like they're not going to be able to get this in real life where they're going to have a boss, they're going to have a like a professor, like, oh, like I think I deserved a B. Like sometimes yes you probably, or an A, yes sometimes you probably did, and you can get it double checked in college, but like sometimes you didn't put enough work in. And it's like you have to, they have to kind of like develop those um skills where they can learn how to manage their time um and manage how they react to certain things. And it's like but we can't, but they can't, like we talked about like how they develop um that cognitive part where they deal with certain things at 4 years old, and it's like they're learning how to deal with that, and if we're dealing that for them, they're not going to learn how to deal with that later on in life,
And
whereas
I
when we
think,
were young.
right, I think it circles back to your own
Yeah,
personal experience, right? Like you
exactly.
basically learning how you had to reparent yourself.
Exactly. And like when I was younger, I know my mom put those things in place where I learned that like I was scared to be like a little rebel, you know, like I didn't want to put my foot out of line because I didn't want to go to like get into a lot of trouble and lose out on a lot of things that I wanted to do in life, because sometimes that's what happens when you get older. And it's and that's another type of loss that kids go through, because like it it's wanting to go to a certain college, but because they didn't put all their effort into it or whatever, or they didn't put all their ducks in a row because they weren't taught how to, they tend to lose out on the things that they want in life.
Mhm.
And it's hard, and it like yeah there are other options, but sometimes I a lot of things do happen for reasons, and at that point it's going to teach them like, hey, if I really want to do this, then I have to start doing it now. Like it's never too late to change, and they got to realize that it's never too late to change, but start the work, you know, like you got to learn how to start the work. You have to learn how to do things for yourself. And some people are going to be better than you, and some people are, and you're going to be better than some other people. And it's not about everybody winning, it's about you getting to where you need to be.
So what would you like to scream to the world in the past or recently and wish people knew about your grief?
Oh, I so when it came to my grief, that was my anxiety. I had really bad anxiety, and I would need people to be with me. So a lot of my agoraphobia part, where I would need somebody to be with me a lot of the time. And some of my friends get it now because they have anxiety. And a couple of them have apologized to me, but it's like, with my grief, don't don't abandon me. Like, I wish I could tell everybody, don't abandon me. I'm dealing with a lot of stuff. I'm I'm still learning how to process it. And with grief, you always learn every single day that you have to process it in a different way, because your brain is constantly changing. It's constantly doing different things, and you're always going to be doing something different. And the way you develop your grief and the way you deal with your grief can change consistently. And mine has. And sometimes it's put me in a place where people are like, hey, like, you're so different or whatever. And it's like, listen, like, I can't help it. I'm trying. Don't leave me right now because I need you the most.
Well, and to that point, you could say to that other person when they say that to you, like, wow, you're really different. It's like, yeah, if we all stayed the same,
Yeah.
and if I would have
It'd be
be,
boring.
if I'd be I was when I'm 21, boy, man, if I only knew at 21 what I know now.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's the blessing of age is wisdom.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing we don't stay the same. It's a
No.
good thing. I think we need to embrace that.
Yeah.
Embrace the change. Embrace change. That's the
Mhm.
only death, taxes, and change are the only sure things in life.
Oh gosh, I hate
Um,
this.
so what is one tip that you would give another hurting heart today? Maybe specifically, I want to say specifically a teenager that just might so happen to stumble upon this episode today. And maybe the parent of that child or the caretaker of that child.
Number one, it's okay to cry. You're not weak because you're crying. It's it shows strength. It shows that you care, and it shows, and again, crying is so helpful to your psyche. It helps build that chemical balance that you need to kind of deal with the situation and release the buildup inside of you. And to a parent who sees this, just sit there, hold them, tell them it's okay, tell them it's okay to cry. Never say, stop being a baby. Like, I was a big crybaby. I get it. Like, it's a lot. Like, if your kid is a crier, depending on the situation, also just never ever call them a baby. Don't be a baby. Be like, I understand you're having some emotions. Offer them the, like, do you need me to sit with you? Would you like me to hold you and rub your back? Do you need some space? Like, don't overload it, but like, be simple. Like, do you want me to be here, or do you want some alone time? And then they'll let you know. Because like, when I was having my emotions, I just wanted somebody to hold me and rub my back. I still do. Like, because like, I remember being sick, and like really sick. I had pneumonia and I was crying, and my mom sat there and she rubbed my back. And that was my love language. My love language is touch. And like, just rubbing my back, and it was soothing, and that's what it reminds me of. And that's why I feel I need that. And some people just don't. Some people need the space because that's not their love language. Or learn what your child's love language is and show them that you're there and that you care, and give them what they need.
It's a
Always be
very good,
there.
it's a very good point. I wonder if there's a love language book for kids.
You know
Should look
what?
for that.
I didn't learn about love language until I was like maybe like 5 years ago. And it's like, um, so I don't know. I wonder if there is, because people need to learn that it's okay to love this, but you got to realize that some people don't like that. Like
Mhm.
my boyfriend's not touchy. His love language is food.
I
So
don't know if that's a love language, is it?
it can be. It's like
Like
a
one of the
gift or
5?
something. I can't remember. There's 7 of them. There's like
Oh,
gifts.
service. Like
Yeah,
service or
service.
something?
Yeah. Service, gifts, touch. I can't
M
remember the rest.
mine is words of affirmation, and my
Oh, words of
husband's is
affirmation. Yeah.
is touch.
See, I like a mix of everything, but touch is my biggest one. Next to that is words of affirmation because I feel like I always need like somebody to be like, hey, you're doing good. That's another thing.
Well, and there's 2 more points I thought of is that so I was called a crybaby too. And
Mhm.
so if you have a sensitive child, understand that they're not crying just because
Yeah.
some children are just more sensitive.
I
And what's
also learned recently that females like myself, um, that could be a sign of ADHD, is crying all the time, especially if they daydream a lot and they're kind of like, oh, I'd rather sit in the corner and read a book type thing. And that was me. And I'm currently in the process of trying to kind of like figure out if that's what I have. And because like that can also be a very big difference of like how you treat your anxiety in that, right? So,
well, and I just learned about it's come across my sphere recently is complex PTSD, which is
mm,
common in children who've experienced trauma.
mhm.
And so yeah, I don't know if you've heard anything about this or read anything on that.
I
Kind of a
I haven't.
newer thing. It's kind of a
I
newer thing.
I know PT, like I had PTSD and I still do depending on the situation because like I right now my PTSD is more about like the dog that I had and he got run over in front of me and like that's my PTSD now. But I had PTSD from like when my mom had died, but like sometimes PTSD can kind of go away eventually once you start kind of like being like, okay, I'm okay with this situation, that, and like you kind of like got a little bit of closure. Or it just kind of like lessens and kind of like goes into the back burner, especially as you age. But I've never heard of the complex PTSD. I gotta look it up though. I'm going to.
I'm going to ask your opinion on something too in a question because you have anxiety, you said, and you're wondering if you
Mhm.
have ADHD and just listening to what you're saying. And one thing too that, I mean, whether it's addiction, ADHD, anxiety disorders, things like that, do you think or believe, because a part of me really believes that the root of it is grief?
Oh yeah. I think a lot of kids a lot of kids can deal with a lot of grief in the beginning, especially depending on how their childhood is, because a lot of kids go through divorce parents, a lot of kids go through like some sort of abuse. Like even if they have like the perfect parents, there's somebody out there that like they go to school and they get bullied. That's a type of grief, that's a type of trauma, which gives people anxiety about dealing with people and the social anxiety and all that other stuff. So a lot of grief and trauma can definitely be a trigger for a lot of things. Like you could also somewhat have something and then it be triggered by certain other things, whether it be drugs, whether it be grief, whether it be trauma in general, or abuse, anything. Like a lot of things can just be triggered when you've already kind of have it in your brain, and it's almost like an on and off switch except it just turns on and it never goes away. But
See, what I would love to like really deep dive into and research is, following people over decades of their life
Mhm.
into older age and really if you address the grief, get to the root of it and you address
Mhm.
the grief itself,
Yeah, whether it would help.
does everything else kind of level off? Because I have heard many times, even people I've talked to on this podcast who were
Mhm.
on ADHD medication as children,
Yeah.
who had traumatic experiences, who sexual identity issues, things like that, who are now off of medication. Like, so the
Yeah.
ADHD just went away, like the medication, like they just don't need it anymore? Or did it, because he dealt with the grief with a
Mhm.
therapist?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I
I
mean? So I think that's just something I want people to consider and take away from
Oh, yeah.
today, is that
There's other ways of dealing with certain things. Like you have your medication, you have your people that help you. You have there's so many different uh treatment options to a lot of things. Like with the person who has ADHD, they might have needed the medication more when they were a kid because it's harder to kind of get around that. And like it's easier to kind of sit a kid down when they're calm and be like, hey, here's what we can do to kind of help when you're angry or when you're feeling like you need to jump around and all that other stuff. Like my boyfriend has ADHD. He was diagnosed as a child and he was medicated as a child. And he's not really on the medication because he would lose so much weight when he was on the medication. But when he talks to somebody, he has people who are there for him when he needs them the most. He's able to deal with it a lot better. He still has the hyper part where he has to pace a lot of the time. Like, so if he's on the phone, he's like pacing back and forth. He keeps his attention the most when he games. So it's all about finding your focus and finding out where you need to place that focus um and dealing with it in healthy ways. Again, it's all about healthy ways.
and I would just ask then, in that instance, in your boyfriend's example, you don't have to share on the show, but
No.
was there something in his childhood that triggered the ADHD response? Like, did he
Oh yeah.
have any
Yeah.
trauma? That's what
He
I'm
had a lot
getting
of
at.
trauma.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm getting at. Like,
Yeah.
are these diagnoses that people are getting for ADHD, anxiety disorders, things like that,
Mhm.
is it as a result of grief and trauma? And if we dealt
Also.
with the grief and trauma,
Mhm. And don't forget, you also have generational trauma that each generation deals with because that's how it is. Like, um, so a lot of people who say their generational trauma was like they live on very low income and the drugs or alcohol and that was their life, and sometimes it's hard to break out of that. Some people do, like nowadays it's a little easier because there's more resources out there, especially for women, that they are able to break out of this generational trauma of abuse and all this other stuff and flourish for themselves. And it's all about finding, again, it's always about finding your niche and finding what works for you.
and it comes down to access,
Yeah.
being open to help,
Yeah.
and having an awareness that you need help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not a, I am by no means saying, well, we just dealt with all the
Oh,
grief every like,
it is not
it's
easy.
no, it's not, but it
No.
starts with us as individuals first, right?
Yeah.
That's really where it has to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like, with how things are nowadays, too, it's all about having the time to do these things as well. Because you have to work, especially with how high the living cost is nowadays
Mhm.
compared to like 20 years ago. It's the cost of living is so high for a lot of people, like even like people on dual incomes, it makes it hard. So
I do have one thing to say on that though, is because we do have some responsibility in that,
we
because
do.
do we are we gluttonous in some areas of our lives where we think we need certain things to
Oh
fulfill
yeah.
us and make us happy,
Yeah.
and therefore we have these expenses that we probably could live without?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, but like I we only have like Netflix and like Disney Plus. We don't have like cable or anything. So we don't pay like $150 for internet and cable. I just pay for internet and then like a couple streaming services. So there's that, and there's always that media, and there's always those commercials like, oh, come get a new TV, or come get this new console for gaming and all this other stuff. And that is what triggers kids nowadays. And you have YouTube and you have TikTok, and they're like, oh, look at this new toy. Because like YouTube is very big for this, where you have people opening up new toys and just playing them, and kids are just like, oh my God, I need all of that. And it's something that we've even dealt with when we were younger, when we had commercials of like, what was it, like Furby or something, and like
I'm a little bit older than you.
Yeah, well, for me it was like Furby. It was like I can't even remember what came out.
I'm Rainbow Bright.
Bottoms.
I'm Rainbow Bright Days. So
what's her name? Strawberry Shortcake.
Yes, Strawberry Shortcake.
Cabbage Patch Dolls, which I had too.
Yes, yeah.
Those troll dolls. But yeah, like there's always these things, because people just want, like, these companies just want to make money, and they just like advertise all these things, and we think that we need them because they tell us we need them.
People want to feel better.
Yeah.
And like in grief recovery, we call these things STIRBs, short-term energy relieving behaviors. We think if we get these things that we'll feel better.
And it's a lot easier to get these things with Amazon and all this other stuff. You just click a button and it comes to your door. You don't even have to get up and get it anymore.
And you don't have to necessarily pay for it right away either, right? When it comes back to like what you said about credit, and if you don't understand that, and and then you get more grief because you have shame then, and it's a cycle. It's a cycle.
It definitely is. It definitely is. And it's hard to break out of that cycle. So don't ever feel bad, because like I still do it sometimes, and I spend money and I'm like, oh, why did I do this? And like we all do it. It's a part of life, but it's all about making your choices and learning from them.
And maybe living with a little bit more intention.
Yeah.
Being
more aware of like your surroundings. I feel like a lot of us just walk through life in a fog, because we're like zombies. We go from point A to point B because we're told we just need to do that. And it's like, we got to be more aware of what we're doing in our day-to-day life.
And especially when you're in the fog of grief.
Exactly.
So what has your grief taught you?
My grief has taught me to love myself. Because sometimes you're not going to get that love from other people that you need, and you need to learn to love yourself.
I'm writing that down. That is your quotable. That's perfect. That's the best answer, I think. I mean, I love all my guests, but that's by far the best answer, because that really resonates with me too.
Yeah,
I love that.
And it's very hard to love yourself. So
it is, especially when you that really wasn't emulated for yourself, right? And that comes down to, as mothers, that's the best gift too that we can show our daughters and our sons, like loving ourselves, so that they don't need somebody else to fulfill that for them. They don't look to somebody else to fulfill that, or they don't look to food, or they don't look to alcohol, or they don't look to drugs to fulfill that in them.
Exactly.
So is there anything else you would like to share?
I think that's it.
And where can people find you if they would love to reach out to you?
So you can always find me on Instagram. I do have my own personal one. It's Autumn Lily 88. I really have to, it's my old one, but you can also find me at our podcast link, which is or on Instagram, which is Once Upon a Nightmare. I think there's an underscore at the end of that because it was taken. But if you look us up, you'll see us.
All right. Well, and thank you so much for sharing your story today. And we went in a lot of directions, but I think it was everything.
But grief is not singular. So
it's messy. It's very messy. And it touches every area of our life. So I think it's like every area. Yeah, it is. Very perfect. Yes. That's another quotable. Strength is like glitter. It is. It truly is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's naive to think that just because you had a loss, like that's just all you're dealing with. It is impacting your money. It is impacting your parenting. It is impacting your friendships, your marriage, every
Mhm.
aspect of your life. And
Yeah.
I think if we pluck it like a weed and address it and really address it and get complete with what is emotionally incomplete, which
Mhm.
is possible, my
It is.
friends, it is
It
possible.
is. Yeah.
We can live fulfilling and joyful lives.
Yeah. That's definitely
All
it.
right. Well, thank you again. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.